Stephanie just looked at me and told me it's time. So when your wife says it's time, it's time. Good to see everybody this morning. We'll get started. We are on lesson 12 on page 70 in your books. We'll be talking through 1 Corinthians chapter 9 this morning. Before we start, I'm going to ask Clay Perry, since he's over there, whispering to his neighbor to say a prayer for us.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today, for all our blessings. Thank you for the time that you've allowed us to come together, be other brothers and sisters, to be strengthen, encourage, and more importantly, worship. All the SGB with Logan, all the other teachers, help them to be able to focus and stay prepared, and teach them the way, to us, the way it's easy for us to understand and apply to our lives and apply to the lives of those around us. Help us to study your word with an open heart and an open mind. In your son's name, amen.
Yeah, thank you. All right, come on in. Raise your hand if you got engaged this past weekend. Anybody else want to raise their hand?
Mine was last week, and she was just.
Okay.
I've had a week of this already.
Put your hand down. You successfully maintained your marriage for another week. Good job. Jenny did not kill him yet. If you're a new grandparent, there's one. I was talking to Philip a second ago, and he said that the kids have some work to do if y'all going to get to double-digit grandkids. So, let's keep this thing going. All right, we are studying 1 Corinthians, and give you just kind of a little rundown of things from my perspective. First of all, Jacob, if you're listening, he did a fantastic job. Absolutely stellar job. Learned a lot. I kind of feel like you're going to go from the PhD professor to the football coach who has to teach. So buckle up. That's what you're about to get. Let's recap just a little of what we talked about on Wednesday. Who remembers the topic, and just kind of share a little bit of what that was, and then we'll kind of talk about what we extrapolate from that. So what we talked about on Wednesday? Made sacrifice to idols. Okay. And what was the discussion there?
In the context of exercising our rights or not exercising our rights due to the conscience of the matter.
That's right. And so in this scenario, specifically discussed was the mixed sacrifice to idols for some. They did not feel as though it would be right to partake in eating that meat. For the actuality of what was allowed, it was a liberty, it was an okay thing, but it was something that they talked about giving up because of how it might affect others. Now, I guess I'd like to get into a little bit of a specific on that from your life. Is what is an example in our day of perhaps some liberties that we might give up out of love? Who's brave enough to talk about some of that? Because I know I'm going to have a follow-up question to that. You're right.
I think you could argue that maybe modesty, in a sense, could be brought in that. Maybe you feel like you're okay wearing, a certain outfit or a certain, whatever, as a woman. But if you're going to be around, other Christians especially, or other, men or, whoever, just to make sure that everyone else is comfortable and, not causing them to stumble, you might choose differently.
I think that's a great example. Modesty is one of those things that in the Bible we are given framework. Be modest. Okay. What exactly is that? Now, it's modesty of heart is a huge portion of that. Modesty of how you present yourself. In the world today, there's a big push of I can wear and do whatever I want. If you stumble, that's your problem. That's not the teachings here. And so, for instance, for me, I might have no problem whatsoever wearing shorts and showing my ankles. I'm going to be dramatic on this example. Although I may know somebody who has an extreme issue with that. And I may put that aside and wear pants to hang out with them. Right? Fairly simple thing. I guess my question to that is, where does that stop? Where does that stop? So for one instance, as I'm considering those I'm around, perhaps they're weaker Christians, newer in the faith, don't have as much of an understanding. And I'm going to take the other side of that as far as it being me. But at what point do I continue to give up my liberties out of love to support others?
in Logan verse 13, he says, if food causes my brother or sister to fall, I will never again eat meat that I won't cause. I don't think that we've got, a degree. I think that we always are supposed to give deference to our brothers and sisters.
Okay. That's a good point, and that's the verse right before where we're starting today, is he will completely give up meat in its entirety forever. I'm looking at Clay, because Clay and I have an equal affinity for meat. That would be a very difficult thing for us. Put yourself on the other side of that. You're the one who has the issue eating meat, or issue with whatever the scenario is that we're discussing.
There's no place in the scriptures where we put ourselves first for anything.
Okay? Yeah.
Amen.
Are there others who would push their thoughts to the extent of trying to control you in your life?
Yes.
What do we do there?
Talk about it.
Okay?
Because modesty, if I think somebody in this building is being immodest, there are 500 people that I come in contact daily if I go to a mall or outside this place. So as far as me caring how they dress and that's influencing me, it's not about me. I'm really thinking maybe it's not good for them. As it is, why wouldn't I go to somebody who I see isn't really putting God first and tell them? So I think that's a totally different issue, modesty. If we sit here and complain about anybody in this building, then you better stay out of the world unless you're going to that. I'm so sorry, that sounds pretty strong.
No, I hear you. That's a balance I've tried to kind of figure out, and I'm nowhere close as a parent. How much do you shelter your kids and keep them away from everything? How much do you allow them to be exposed to some things, but use it as teaching and conversation? Do you just let them go out into the world and do whatever and hope they make it? A lot of people take that approach. So I think some of the first points that you guys made are really important for us to think about, because we don't want to be controlled. Nobody wants to be controlled. We like to have control of ourselves, of our actions, what we do. However, as the author points out here, liberties must be regulated by love. And that's really what it boils down to. If you get to that scenario that I just laid out, perhaps somebody is trying to use, some liberties against you and control you, there's a whole other issue at hand that has to be discussed. And it's their focus on spiritual things, it's love. Because if I'm not showing love by perhaps not giving up a liberty that I don't feel like I should, well, on the other side, if I'm trying to control others on sources or topics of liberties, then I've got a similar heart problem, a similar love problem. Yes, sir.
There's also having the freedom to exercise liberty, and then there's kind of flaunting that liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Using Facebook, social media, for example.
Okay.
That kind of thing. You can do whatever you want to do within scriptural guidelines. But then kind of publishing it far and wide, showing it out there in people's faces, you got a control balance there too.
Well, that's the other side of that liberty conversation. I have liberty, I can do it. Nothing you can tell me about it, right? I can do what I want. It's not that being regulated by love. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I see someone, I think, is making some choices that concern me. I need to get to know them really well and talk with them before I judge them, because I think it's easy before you know them to quickly tell them how to live, what to do, but it's wrong.
Yeah. No, I think that's extremely a good point, and I was thinking about that as the last comment was being made, is if there is a conversation to be had, if there is perhaps somebody that is being a bit controlling about the liberty conversation or other things, or maybe there's something that I feel like, while that might be a liberty, I feel like you're leading down a wrong path based on, however much experience you might have. And in those scenarios, if you don't have that relationship with them, if you haven't had that investment, they're much less likely to listen. Yes, ma'am.
Just along that line too, I think we need to take into consideration the verse concerning, your conscience, not that you can be necessarily always led by your conscience, because that's framed by everything around you, but,
Sure.
Realizing, I think sometimes you have to be honest with yourself in the sense that you may study, come to a point and realize this may be a liberty, and even being okay with that person's liberty, but there are things maybe I grew up with that could be a tradition even.
Yeah.
But to go outside of that would bother my conscience, even though for you, I could say that is a liberty. You know what I mean? Like, you also have to be careful with your own self that, and remember, if it's not purely out of faith of yourself, for you, that is a sin. And that balance too, and realizing that with a brother or sister, that, even if it may to me truly be a sin if I can't get past it, even though I'm not judging them. Does that make sense? That may be a comment, but.
Yeah, and I also think about scenarios like, think about worship service. Those who've been around 30, 40 plus years. How many times did a man serve, without a tie on? Right? I haven't worn a tie in quite some time. I hate them. It's hot. I sweat. Right? That's just the truth. But is that 50 years ago? Would you have ever seen that? No. Now, maybe 10% are wearing tie. Is that wrong? Is that a sin? No, I don't believe so. And so, in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking about, liberties or gray areas, if you will, or things that aren't specifically laid out, there are some impact that culture has on it. Our culture is not as much of a tie wearing culture any longer. Your tie looks great, by the way. You're too, Rob. So things like that, whereas it might have been a stumbling block 40, 50 years ago for others, I don't see it as that anymore. Maybe still be for some. That might be something.
Now it's
Just the ornaments. Yeah, I think you'd have to watch out for Eric on those. He's got a few. Yes, sir.
So a couple of things, and we've talked, a couple have already talked about this, but these subjects are higher order. These are meat of the word subjects. And our role is to gently teach, right? This abrupt, I'm going to go tell you how you should behave, that never goes well. And that's not Christian-like in behavior, because when you're talking about the meat of the word, you've got to help them and develop them, and that's called teaching. And you need to do that gently for someone that is not deep in the scriptures. So that's first point. Second point, I think we do have some examples and patterns of these extreme behaviors that we should watch out and avoid in the context of these liberties. Does anyone else, can you think of another example in the scriptures where it was taken to extremes? Jesus called it out. The Sadducees and Pharisees were binding things that were not a part of the old law. They were traditions, they were things that they had come up with, probably initially out of wisdom, but then they became traditions, and they bound them on the people to such an extent that became their focal point. And so I would challenge us, in the context of this, study that and understand how that came about, how it led to, such that we can guard ourselves of not adopting these traditions and other things that sometimes we can find. We can take them all the way to, that's sinful, you're going to hell, kind of thing, and make sure that's what the Lord intended. Because usually those extreme views, in my opinion, are not found in the scriptures. So I think we do have that example. Take a look at it and see if there's some parallels that we can apply.
To your first point, could someone come off the street who has never been here, who's never heard hardly anything about the gospel, hear it, be pricked to their heart, and appropriately be baptized that day? Yes, absolutely. All right, God can do that. if they do that, do they know very much about the rest of the word? Right? If all of a sudden we then beat them up over what they're wearing, how they're talking, or those sort of things, how endearing is that going to be for them to continue into the word? Right? And that's why we say often that the baptism is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning. Right? And so if someone does that, and then all of a sudden they, take the Lord's name in vain, something the world does all the time, wear something that that might clearly be inappropriate. We'll just say clearly, let's not leave gray area there. Addressing it with love, getting to know that person, having the appropriate relationship, and gradually teaching and allowing them to understand. It's going to go much better than, like you said, you can't do that, you're going to hell. Stephanie, do you have something?
I was gonna say, I love what Andy just said. That was 100% spot on. It has a lot to do with our childhood upbringing, and I always go back to childhood because if something was enforced on you to behave and act and dress and whatever a certain way, the scary side of that is you can easily teach your children to judge others that do not behave or dress in that same
And then you're judging the wrong
manner.
thing.
And the last thing I want to do, and I've told some of this 100 times, is I do not want you to grow up to be a judgmental Church of Christ sister. I do not want that, because I want her to have a good heart, and to be a good example. And I think a lot of things that are enforced in childhood almost make us fearful, and we can be afraid of things, of the way other people do things and personal preference and stuff like that. We have a really hard time seeing the other side of things, or maybe how another family was brought up or whatever. And we just need to be careful with that, get to know each other. But like Andy was saying, not binding things on people and making it doctrine.
Yeah.
Making it like, you're in sin because you're doing this. Let's try to take a couple steps back and not be judgmental. If somebody dresses differently, somebody walks in here all tatted up with tattoos and piercings and spiked hair, go up and hug them. If a girl just gets baptized and she comes in with a dress that might be a little short for a lot of people's preference, don't go up and attack her and corner her and tell her your dress is inappropriate. Give things time and be more accepting of people who were not brought up the same way that you were.
The answer is always, I say always, in many ways, with this conversation, it's in the middle too. So we can't go too far that direction and not true. That's a trap in this too, because we can, I can't judge, that's what the world says, judge not, right? I can't say anything, there's things that are on. And so you can't go too far that way either. Yes, ma'am. Laughing, how'd you do?
No, I'm saying, I can't believe how much people talk and chit chat and kids run around. When we walked into church as a Methodist, you came there to worship God.
Okay.
You didn't just party. So it was a fellowship.
Is that what we're doing?
I was Methodist and we were always chit chatting.
Yeah.
We chit chatted afterwards.
Yeah.
When you came to worship, you didn't turn around and look at who was behind you.
Very solemn, very focused.
That was not a Methodist thing at the Yankees. And so that was weird. Or, and then another one I talk about. To me, one of the most moving days was Good Friday, because we thought about the death of Christ.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me not to, every Good Friday, not go inwardly, spiritually, and think about that.
Well, a lot of people grew up going to Christmas Eve services and things like that, and yeah, that fits in. Yes, sir.
So in this, what we're talking about, this is a matter of the heart, right? And here's what I mean by that. I have worked in some very unique places where it is, whether it be a locker room or whether the control room floor is a lot worse than a locker room, right? It is amazing the things that are said and done, right? when people, I actually had people comment to me, they were like, hey, you know, people didn't cuss around me. People didn't go to the dirty jokes or but it didn't start out that way, right? It's after they got to know me, right? And then they realized that, well, Eric never cusses, or Eric never tells dirty jokes, or he never, and so they started not doing that around me, right? So if you have people that are new, that walk in, and there may be a family that walks into church today and they're wearing shorts. Well, they may be from Daytona Beach, Florida, and that's normal, right? That's what they do, right? So they may walk in here and they're moving to this area, and we should love them, and we should open our arms to them, and we should accept them, and we should embrace them. But I bet you, they're going to look around and they're going to go, oh, this isn't how this is done here, right? Or this isn't what is considered appropriate here, right? And so I bet if you give it a month, they're probably not wearing shorts anymore.
Right? When Cooper was rocking his ponytail, I told us that the school will dictate when he gets cut.
But that's the love from that side, right?
Yeah.
Now here's the love from the other side, right? Someone comes in and they're not dressed to your standard, and your whatever your brain tells you is your standard, right? They may not have the money to buy decent clothes. They may not have, that may have been the best thing they could grab that day to put on to come to services, right? And how dare us, to a certain degree, right? How dare us, sit there, it's like, don't.
Maybe they were traveling, they forgot one bag, and they made it.
But your first thought should not be to, like, we are so bad at this as human beings. Our first thought is to go to the worst thing, right? We don't give grace. We don't go get to know somebody, right? We look at them, we judge them, and we think the worst. We should really, really, really try to show some grace, to get to know someone, to love them, to get to know who they are and what they're about, right? Before we start applying these standards, right? And so that needs to go both ways.
Yes.
Just a real life example. Wednesday night, one of our sisters had a guest with her, and she would have lots of good questions. And she brought her over and said, hey, could you answer some of these questions? Some of those questions were very simple. Hey, there's a direct command. And, our sister and myself articulated the ways we establish authority and this, that, and the other. But some of her questions were very high level, and you had to dig in and you'll have to study over time. And that's what we're able to tell this person with these inquiries is, look, this is going to take some time. This is a higher level. And we'd be glad to show you how we arrive at this behavior, why we do this. Come study with us. Come be a part of this, and let's grow in the Word was our response to her. So some very clear things,
yes,
there's a command right here. Here's an example on that question you asked. These others, it's going to take a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Come back and study with us. Be a part of our studies. And that, I think, is an example, that worked really well between this sister that brought this guest and, a little engagement we had for 5 or 10 minutes there last Wednesday night.
Just like services. Regulating liberties by love, regulating responses by love, having discussions, and then, like you said, some of these take time. I want to dive in.
That's an okay answer. That is an okay. Sometimes we want to just, because in the questions oftentimes come at us as definitive. Why do you do this? It's okay. Don't feel like you have to answer it in the manner that they ask the question.
Well, in a scenario like that, this might be the first time this person has visited, and we don't know if maybe they're coming back. And so there can be a little bit of a pressure right there to give them all the answers they want. But like you said, sometimes it's not possible in that time frame. So, well said. I want to dive in here a little bit into chapter 9. I'm going to read, actually, could somebody read the first 5 verses? And I wanted to have that discussion surrounding the Wednesday's lesson and all that, because it leads right into what it is Paul's talking about. So somebody read the first 5 verses for us.
Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me is this: do we not have a right to eat and drink? Do we not have a right to take along a believing wife, even as the rest of the apostles and brothers of the Lord and Cephas?
Okay. So, what's Paul saying right here on the outset? He's asking questions. What's he trying to get them to realize?
I tell people I'm an apostle, if I've got it right, I've got it right.
Okay.
No.
I'm an apostle. I've got some rights for certain things, right? He says specifically, do we not have a right to eat and drink? Do we not have a right to take along a believing wife? I can get married if I want. As do other apostles. He mentions brother of the Lord and Cephas. He goes on in verse 6 to say, Lord, is it that Barnabas and I, who have no right to refrain from working for a living, who serves as a soldier at his own expense, who plants a vineyard without eating any of its fruit, or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? So he gives several different examples of different types of work people do, and they're able to benefit from it. Now, what kind of work is he doing right now?
Sacrificing work, you know, he has
Okay.
the right to do anything, but he's showing them that I'm sacrificing for you.
Yes, yes.
I just kind of read it, I just kind of almost inferring like people were accusing him of preaching for money.
Yes.
And I think that's really what they're getting at, is I'm not preaching for money, or, you know, I'm doing this because I have to, but I have a right to be compensated for it also.
You know, from that standpoint, like, again, would it have been wrong for him to accept some money for preaching? No, that's a lot of the point he's making here. We can give other examples. You know, but I'm not even doing that. Like, I could, but I'm not, right? But think about all these other people who do this work. They benefit from it. This work, they benefit from it. This work, they benefit from it, right? And so he's saying, again, if there is anybody that has a liberty to do these things, I do. But then, going on from verse 8 to, let's do 14. Let me read 8 through 14.
Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out grain. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Surely he has done this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us, because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel. Don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and that those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel.
Okay. So the first half of that, again, he further reiterates the second point, right? Do I not have these things on human authority, right? I also have the law. What does the law say? The law of Moses, right? So he addresses that. He speaks specifically to those who are plowing. Like the plowman should plow in hope, and the thresher thresh in hope of sharing in the crop. They're going to get something out of this. If we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if we reap material things? It's okay to benefit from these things. But then the second half, what does he say he did?
I think in verse 12 he's kind of pointing out that it's better, unless we endure all things, unless we hinder the gospel of Christ. I think he's saying it's better to preach and not get paid and go out and do it without financial loss, if you will. Even though you may be deserving of getting paid, it's better to still preach it no matter what, preach it freely, financially, and of course.
Okay. So I'm sure our elders are going to use that principle to not pay our next preacher, right? No, not at all. His point here is that, again, this is the liberty that I have, the situation that I'm in, what I am providing, what I'm doing. But I'm not going to allow anything of any shape, any size, any form get in the way of what I'm really trying to do. okay? He's really, I mean, he is saying, I am happy being very poor, having basically no place to live, no place to sleep, no money, as long as I can teach the gospel, and as long as I can bring people to Christ. He's willing to do that. And he's not going to allow anything to get in the way, even things that he has the right to do. And I think that says a lot about the heart, and that's what we were talking about at the beginning, of our liberties are to be regulated by love. Then going on in verse 15, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna say, I think you can also kind of parallel that to like the middle to last part of chapter 7. You know, when you start 25, like it's your right to marry or not marry if you want to, but the person that is married is gonna have that other burden, right? They're gonna have that other thing that they're focusing on. So the way that I've always taken it as well is if you've got a man who's preaching and he can't make money for that, then he's got to make money somewhere else, assumingly, right? So then he's going to have his interest split also. So would it not be better to have a man that can put everything into spreading the gospel and also be able to get his living that way?
I can't overlook the irony of somebody who just got engaged, sharing the part that it'd be better not to marry.
Listen, he heard that all before you.
Oh, there was a man I went to church with when Stephanie and I were engaged, that up until the week I got married, he was saying it's not too late. It's not too late.
Who was that?
Mr. Cavender.
Well.
No, older Cavender.
The one that didn't get divorced? The one that didn't get divorced?
His father.
His father.
The older one.
Okay, well.
Wonderful man.
They must have had some stuff going on.
No, well, but to his point, and he was very adamant about saying that to me. But as soon as I came back after marriage, he said, "That's it." He said, "She's your focus now, right?" And to his point was making sure I understood the permanence of what was taking place. To your point, yeah, there's other things to focus on, right? If you're married, if you're preaching, if you got to live, there's other things. That's part of why we had the discussion a couple of weeks ago. From that context, it's not wrong to marry, but that does give you something else to focus on, something else to pay attention. You have kids, something else to focus on. You have a job, something else to focus on. You got a car that broke down, something else to focus on, right? There's always more things to focus on. And so working hard to ensure that those things don't get in the way, that's exactly what he's doing here. He's not going to allow anything to get in that way. In verse 15, he says, "But I have made no use of these rights, nor am I writing these things to secure any such provision." So he spent all this time saying, I could. It's within my right. I have this liberty. He said, but I'm not, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not even asking for it here. He said, so don't misread that. He says, "For I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting. For if I preach the gospel and give me no ground for boasting, for necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." Now, what's he saying here is, for if I preach the gospel that gives me no ground for boasting, why does he want to boast? That sounds negative. Verse 4, "I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting."
Prove that he's not there for the sake of money.
Okay.
And he is truly there for the sake of the gospel.
What would he be boasting about?
That it's because of him and not God.
Okay. He doesn't want anything to get in the way of that. That's absolutely true. And if there was anything that was going to throw a curveball on the work he's done, on the true nature of his focus, on his love, if anybody, he is so adamantly focused on the souls, right, on bringing people to Christ, and if anybody were to say anything otherwise, he'd rather die. That's how much he cares about it. Yes, ma'am?
So don't you, because seeing the word hinder in 9 and going back to 8 cause them to stumble. What if I got up every morning and said, I want to make sure I don't do anything to have my brothers and sisters lose their faith or to cause somebody outside not to trust in God?
Yeah.
And that's what he's saying. If it's going to cause anybody a question that maybe they're thinking my motives are wrong, I'm not going to do it.
Is that in anywhere we live today in the United States of America a normal train of thought. It's not. I mean, the thoughts and the mindset that we are bombarded with in the world we live in is look out for number one, right? Look out for me. I gotta get, my money. I gotta do what I want. If somebody else has a problem with me, that's their problem, not mine. Okay, it's very much the opposite mindset of the world we live in today. And that's something that we have to be cautious with, because like I started with, there is a point where perhaps somebody takes advantage of you giving up your liberties and they try to control you. And they shouldn't do that. Do you think Paul would have said, no, that's enough, you can't do that, I'm not going to let you control me? He was willing to die for it. That seems quite extreme. That seems quite extreme for us in a world where, again, we worry about ourselves. He goes on to say, let's see, we'll pick up in verse 19. For though I am free for all, I've made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win under those under the law. To those outside of the law I became as outside of the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. Put this in your own words. What's he saying? He's going to do what it takes. That's a great way of putting it. What is it that it took?
Adapting.
Okay.
Giving up all of his rights for the sake of the gospel. It's an extension of his 8 and 9.
There are people that I'm gonna tell myself here that I like spending time with more than others. I'm not gonna say names, right? That's normal, right? That's natural. I feel much more comfortable in this room with this group of people than I would in many other places in this world, right? You drop me at a mosque in a Middle Eastern country, I'm gonna feel quite out of place. Okay, I just will. His point here is he found a way to relate to anybody and everybody and to meet them where they were and to go from there. That's such a talent. That's such a talent. Anybody here that's in sales for work, it's part of what you got to do, right? You got to figure out who it is you're talking to, what it is that they value, what is their pain point, what is something that they need help with, and can you provide that help? It's no different teaching the gospel of Christ. Where is somebody in their life? What are they going through? What are their challenges? What are their questions? Right? Now that we know what they are, we can preach to them Christ. Right? Just like the preaching to the Ethiopian eunuch. I don't know exactly where he was. Well, we know a little bit because he was pointing to Scripture. But he was able to be met where he was and then be baptized almost immediately. That's a challenge. And how often do we say, like Lee said in the sermon this morning, I don't know enough. I don't know enough to teach. It's about relating. It's about relating to people very intently.
So I think the key about being adaptable in the sales world is the same thing like you said. It's about being able to treat everybody the same, but communicate with them different ways.
Yeah.
Based off of how they communicate, how you communicate. You got to be able to change your communication.
You got to understand them.
That's kind of evolve. There's actually a book about that.
You can't do that without understanding them.
Exactly. There's actually a book about it called The Greatest Salesman Ever. I think the name of it is written by a guy named Og Mandino. But it's about Paul. It's not a biblical story, but it's about Paul being the greatest salesman in the world.
All things to all people. Yes, sir.
So it's funny because you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about it, but we have to change, and parents especially, right? I wish I'd done this better. We have to change what the question is. When we're growing up, we're asked, what do you want to do in your life? Right? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? And when you start going through it, it all ends at money. If you have that discussion with your kid, I guarantee at the end, it's usually going to end in money. Right? We ask it the wrong way. We ought to say, who do you want to serve? Because everybody serves. And if you don't have to be a salesman to serve. Everybody serves. I was having this discussion with my auto mechanic the other day, 24 years buddy of mine, and I said, and we were talking about this, and I told him, I said, you know, somebody should have asked you. He goes, I'm an auto mechanic. And I said, no, you're someone, you serve people and you help them have dependable transportation to get from one place to another. I said, you serve those people. That's who you serve. We all serve. Paul understands he serves. We have to decide who are we going to serve, and stop asking our children about how much money they're going to make and what they want to be. Start asking people, who are you going to serve and who do you want to serve, right? And so, and you'll make money at that too, by the way, but that's fine. That's a byproduct. But how do you want to serve in this world? Because everybody does.
Very good point. We're going to pick up verse 24 on Wednesday. I don't want to rush through the end of the chapter, so we will pick up there and then do the first half of chapter 10. Any other final thoughts or comments before we wrap up? Okay, thank you all very much. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Area of my life situation would I ever wear anything like that. So I just, she said, I just don't think